Okay. Fear and uncertainty arise in my mind. Will I be able to answer these questions? Are there any questions? Oh, that's good. We're off to a good start. So, welcome to Q&A. Thank you for those who have asked questions, and I'll do my best to answer them. Noble silence question. I notice we tend to use signs or body language sometimes, mostly because we are trying to be nice to each other or say thank you for some reason. Should we still refrain from it during our retreat? That's actually a very good question. It's something that when we remember to, we actually talk about in our orientation and our tour. So basically, with noble silence, when you are in this retreat, you should not feel like you have to, if you're walking past somebody, like you have to make eye contact and acknowledge them, or if somebody sneezes, you don't have to say bless you and all these kind of things. So that is something that you definitely don't feel like you need to have to do if you are trying to be mindful and working on your mind, then that's fine. So if you feel like you should refrain from it, then you can definitely do so. I have read passages about non-reacting and non-attaching. Sometimes I think I get the idea, but then I turn to picturing my two young boys, and I am unable to conciliate the thought anymore. I just feel overwhelmed by my feelings as a mother. Any chance or any change to get some insight from you? That's a good question as well. We hear this when we read a lot of Dhamma books, and we hear people talk. I even talked about it today, about letting go, about renouncing. And then somebody who has children is like, how can I let go of my children? How can I renounce my children? All these kind of things. The answer is that you don't have to. The answer is, we in our lives all have lots and lots of things that we can work on becoming detached from. Or non-reacting to. So, there are lots of other issues, and if you feel like you're being a bad Buddhist or you're a bad meditator because you have feelings for your children, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. In this life, even monastics have attachments. We strive to lessen our attachments, but I'm a monk, 15 years later or however long, in the future, my parents die. Of course I'll feel sad because I have an attachment to them. They raised me, unless I'm an Arahant by then, which I don't think is going to happen. So we don't have to worry about that. But, so of course there's going to be an attachment there, and there's going to be a grieving because of that attachment. There's nothing wrong with that attachment. So my suggestion is to work on those things that you can start lessening and letting go of. Is there any specific direction I have to face when I'm meditating? Not that I know of. I don't know if that might be a cultural norm in some other countries, but the direction of the meditation does not matter, as far as I know. If every experience arises and passes away, and to be mindful requires detachment from those experiences, What is the purpose of human relationships, which inherently must and do endure? Are we to dispense with these relationships to be truly mindful? Who says human relationships endure? What does endure? Nothing is permanent in this world. The only thing permanent, as Bhanteji likes to say, is impermanence. That does not necessarily mean, so this is another one going along the same lines of feeling like, oh, I'm a bad Buddhist because I have relationships and I talk to people. I'm not like alone by myself in the woods, meditating and denouncing the world. That's definitely not something that you need to feel as a practicing Buddhist. Even as a monastic, to a certain extent. There's all kinds of idealism about monks being in the woods by themselves, meditating. But that's not necessarily reality, because from the very beginning, the Buddha set up this community, this fourfold assembly of male monastics, female monastics, male laypersons, female laypersons, all together as a group, so that they all depend on each other. So even that is something that we are all together in this practice. So the purpose of human relationships, and again, even as monastics, we have friendships. We don't have romantic relationships and stuff like that. We don't have children and do all the things that lay people do. But there is still friendships. There's still human contact. I'm here, sitting here, talking with all of you, and we're spending this long, weekend together, doing our meditation and our practice. So the key thing to be mindful of is that, yes, this will end. Whatever, you're married, it will end. One or both of you, well, both of you are going to die eventually, but one will maybe die first, maybe not. So you will lose, your people that you have attachments to, or more likely, you'll probably get divorced. There is a 50%, Well, us monks don't have to worry about that, both the female and the male monks. But this is something, it's really more of being aware. When you're aware, no matter what relationships you have, no matter if you're a layperson, monastic, no matter what your life situations are, it's being aware that in this moment, in every moment, in everything in the universe is coming to be, is arising, is staying for a time, and then is passing away. Even the universe, scientists tell us that the universe will end in one way or another. They're not necessarily sure which way it will end, but it will end. So if the universe will end, everything else will end. So we're just being aware of that. And when we have that awareness that, that this will end, or this too shall pass, it shouldn't be a depressing thing like, oh man, everybody, there's 5 remembrances that the Buddha tells us to remember all the time. First is that you're subject to old age. You're not exempt from old age. You're subject to illness. You're not exempt from illness. You're subject to death. You're not exempt from death. And then the one that everybody cringes at, everything dear and pleasant to you, you will one day be separated from. So the message is not to be depressed that you're going to be separated, or depressed that you have these, or detaching from these human relationships. The message is to be grateful for the time that you have, to use this time wisely, when you're with this person, or you're with people that you have relationships with, to spend it in a wise and skillful time. Oh, what's the 5th? I didn't go over the 5th. Okay. The 5th is the 5th is that your karma is your you are subject to your karma. Whatever you do for good or ill, you will be subject to, whether in this life or future life. So that's the fifth. But so yeah, this is, I think the message is to be grateful and to do spend the time with people and experiences that you experience, knowing that they will end. People will come in and out of your lives. Experiences will come in and out of your lives. And to allow that to happen, not to try to grasp when things, when people and experiences leave your life, we don't want to greedily grasp to them. This is how life is. This is how all experience is. This is why we talk about, and the Buddha talks about following the breath. You can see this arising and passing away in every single breath. So that's why it's important to realize this into the practice, and not to see it as something that's depressing or sad, but something that is an amazing, grateful experience that when you look back at it, you wouldn't have done it any other way, and you had, it was something that really helped you in your life, on your practice. So that's where I guess that's my answer to that. There are many lists, such as the Four Noble Truths, the Three Characteristics, the Seven Factors of Enlightenment, the Five Hindrances, and also the 37 Factors of Awakening. That's not on there, but I just want to know. There's actually pictures on the internet that have all of the Buddhist lists. There's whole websites that have all the Buddhist lists. So that is very true. There's a lot of lists. How do we balance our practice to use these while not overcomplicating the practice? One can get very caught up in the lists with a lot of thinking. That's definitely part of the practice. There is when you're learning the practice, when you're learning all of the scope of Buddhism, there's a lot to take in. And especially when you first start the suttas, you just realize there's thousands and thousands of pages of what the Buddha said and what the disciples said and all this stuff, and you're just overwhelmed. Like, what do I do with all this? I'll give you a quick and dirty answer. You sit down and you watch your breath. That's the answer. When you sit down, you watch your breath and you just practice, it'll all come. When I first started as a lay person, when I first started getting into the suttas and really started getting into learning a lot about Buddhism, for a long time, I didn't know, what's this 7 Factors of Enlightenment? What's this, what are these 5 hindrances? And, I really didn't, I knew of the 5 hindrances, but I didn't learn them deeply up until a point where I started getting to a point in my practice where they were actually becoming a factor that I can really examine, analyze, and to do something about. So the short answer is to just do it. Just meditate, just practice, to not worry about this. This is really a worry. This is trying to get it all together in one. It's this, again, this is the whole thing like, I have to be a good Buddhist. I have to know all of these lists by heart, and I have to do all these things. And okay, I'm sitting down. Okay, so what's the next step? This step. Okay, then no, you'll just drive yourself nuts doing that. So the best thing is to follow your breath, or if that, whatever your meditative practice is that works best for you. And gradually over time, that is how you get to know all of these things. I didn't take the refuge in the precepts and then all of a sudden I knew everything about Buddhism. I still don't know. I still have a lot to learn. And I'm sitting here in front of you with a robe. So, don't feel bad. Don't feel like you need to know all of these things by heart. You will actually, in my experience, you will start to see them in your practice. When you start to see them in your practice, that's when you say, oh, okay, so that's what they meant. And then that triggers you, that gives you the desire to want to learn more about that. When I was going through the suttas in the beginning, there's a wonderful website called accesstoinsight.org, if you've ever used that. If not, I'll highly suggest it. And one of the great things that they have on that website is random sutta. So you just click on it, and then just a random sutta will pop up. And you read it, and in the beginning I'd be like, okay, I'm reading this, I have no idea what they're talking about, this doesn't click with me, okay, next random sutta. So I'm just reading what you can, understanding what you can, and practicing. Practicing is the most important part, because you will see all of this. You will see the 7 factors of enlightenment. You will see the 5 hindrances. The 5 hindrances especially, you will see the 5 hindrances. I've probably had all 5 of them just meditating with you today, easily. So you will see that in your practice as you're doing it. So this is just really a case of putting this aside, just sitting down and just practicing. Not letting all of this mountain of information get in the way of your practice. What does it mean to bring peace to others, Bhante? I think this is a question of Bhante G, actually. You said last night that we cannot do that if our minds are filled with greed, hatred, anger, and delusion. Does this mean we must be enlightened before we can bring peace to others? Even though this is to Bhante G, I think I'll say some things to this. No, obviously not. And the reason being is because what our actions, like I spoke about this a little bit before, about our actions of giving, of opening up, of following the precepts, our actions actually allow that to happen. Our actions allow that to give that gift of fearlessness, of peace to others. We cannot change others. We can't give peace to somebody, and nor can somebody give peace to us. I can't hand it, put it in a box and hand it to you and say, here's peace, and then you're peaceful. That's not how it works. But we can help, within our own practice, being an example and being a person that people see and they look up to, and they say, oh, this person is doing a good thing, and this person's a good person. And that, that can lead that to them having questioning, to them asking. Like, I was the only Buddhist I knew in my daily life until I came here. I had no Sangha near me, I had no other Buddhists. I was a lone practitioner. And so what that led to a lot of, and I did most of my meditations in the morning before work, and what that led to a lot of is people are like, that guy meditates, and he's kind of calm, and he seems happy, so then I'm going to ask him a question, or what am I going to, and so people will come and they'll ask questions, and sometimes you can answer the question to the best of your ability, and then it's up to them. The ball's in their court, whether they want to actually do the practice and take the time to start to find that peace little by little. So and if our minds are, if our mind is filled with greed, hatred, and delusion, which, by the way, it always is, or at least for the most part, the only person's mind who is completely eradicated of greed, hatred, and delusion is someone who's awakened. And I'm pretty sure none of us are awakened in this room. So we all have greed, hatred, and delusion in us right now. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that we can't think thoughts of non-greed, non-hatred, and non-delusion. Those do occur. But the 3 roots are always inside of us until we totally cut them off at the root. So no, you don't need to be enlightened. You can do this, just by being an example to others. And last question. I have read that enlightenment is lonely. What does this mean? How so? Well, I actually can't talk to you about that from experience. So, I don't know. Enlightenment is lonely. Well, I think somebody who is looking at it from the perspective of somebody who is not awakened, it probably is lonely. We think of an enlightened being as somebody who has no attachments. And then automatically we think of our own attachments, of the people that we love and that kind of thing. So we think of an enlightened being who is aloof from the world. So there you go, he's away from the world, he must be lonely. What does he do in the woods over there by himself, being all awakened and stuff? So I think that question is you can see the perspective of the question is coming from somebody who is trying to understand the mind of an awakened being. And you can read all thousands and thousands of pages of the suttas, and you'll never see that in the suttas. The Buddha said that you cannot know the mind of an awakened being. You cannot understand awakening really until you experience it for yourselves. The most that the Buddha could do was to give similes. And even those similes, he said, obviously, don't really encapsulate everything. It's just the closest thing that the person can do. And, just thinking about it from my own perspective, I am somebody who definitely 100% believes in that somebody can be awakened. And I don't see it as something that's magical, mystical, otherworldly kind of things. When you read the suttas and when you read what the Buddha talks about what awakening is, like I said before, greed, hatred, and delusion, the eradication of greed, hatred, and delusion. I can understand greed, hatred, and delusion in my mind as I practice and as I understand it. This thought's a thought of attachment, of clinging. This thought's a thought of ill will. I can understand these thoughts. And not necessarily, maybe very briefly, in brief times in our lives, I can understand, oh yeah, I remember that time where I didn't have any ill will in my mind. I was practicing metta, I was at bhavana or whatever, and then there's no ill will. And I looked at no ill will for any being. Wow, that's amazing. And of course a second later it just totally went away and you started hating somebody. We can start to understand this in our mind, and we can just try to even imagine a glimpse of what it would be like if there's no greed, hatred, and delusion in your mind. And to me that sounds really, really cool, really good. When you start to experience, when you meditate and you practice and you start to experience states, when the monkey mind quiets down, when you're not, chattering away future, past, all these things, when you're not downing yourself, when your mind's not doubting and downing yourself, all of these, when you start to experience these states, it's just, this is really nice, this is really peaceful. And then you start to kind of gain confidence, like what the Buddha is saying is actually, it's working. So far he's been right. So, what else has he said that is right? And so you just keep practicing and you start to, and you experience and practice more and more. So, I don't know. I don't think I could call it lonely. I really don't. But again, I'm not talking from experience. So, we're all just unenlightened beings trying to understand the mind of an awakened being. And in a lot of ways, that's a fruitless endeavor. So, okay, so we have plenty of time, and I'm done with questions. So I will offer up to, if anybody has any questions that they'd like to ask me here and now. If not, then we can take a break and continue our meditation. Yes, sir.
I read a book by a guy named Dan Ingram.
Okay.
And the title of the book is Grant, and why I bought the book, it says Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha.
Mm-hmm.
And he refers to himself as the Arahant Daniel Ingram.
Mm-hmm.
And he describes all the various the jhana steps, different levels of enlightenment, stream entering, and there are websites where people get on and chat. It's like, I had this happen to me, where do you think I am on this scale? Is it not proper, or can you, like if Bhante G says you can ask any question, can you ask are you an Arahant?
I've heard people ask him that about 20 times at least. Yeah.
And what was his answer?
His answer is no.
Okay.
Yeah, I've heard that answer also, Bhante Silananda. It's very common. I think I know this person, this Dan Ingram, because I think I've been on his website before. It's quite interesting. He has other people have PhD, Esquire, blah, blah, blah. It's PhD, Arahant, this, that. It's almost like he could give you a card. Yeah, Arahant.
And if it's obviously it's that's why the Buddha gave you the techniques that it was something to strive for.
Yeah. Well, I will say it is against actually the Vinaya rules for a monastic to tell a layperson his attainment. And the reason being is because most of the rules occurred in this way, because monks were going around, because people were like, oh, enlightened beings, I'm going to give them all kinds of stuff and really praise them and do all this stuff. So people are going around, yeah, I'm enlightened, yeah, praise me, I'm better. This guy's only a stream enterer. What?
Like a TV event.
Yeah, basically. So it's this guy's only a stream enterer. I'm an enlightened being. Giving me stuff is better for you. So and the Buddha, found out about that. And he's like, no, this is not a proper way for monks to do it. So no. So this is why, with extremely rare exception, you won't see a monastic talk about his attainments. I actually heard somebody put a question literally, are you an Arahant? Are you a non-returner? Are you literally in the same question, trying to figure out if he'll say yes, no, and 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 I'm not going to go into it, but he said no, and then he didn't answer one, and that's all I'm going to say about that, because I don't want to insinuate anything, but. So that's what you'll hear from a monastic. I mean, you won't hear a monastic with rare exception. There is one monastic that comes to my mind, Ajahn Mahabua in the Thai forest, and he came out and said he was enlightened. I don't know how many years ago, a good amount of years ago, and his main reason was because there's really a thought that enlightenment it can't be done. And this is something that is actually very common for many hundreds of years in the Buddhist world. And that's the feeling that nobody can become awakened. The Buddha Dhamma is just not pure enough, or there's whatever reason is, we can't become awakened, even monastics. So we're not going to meditate, we'll just, we'll do what we can for a better life. The monastics will learn Dhamma, learn the suttas, and teach that, and that's good merit. And lay people will, give and be generous, and that's good merit. And then maybe one day, we'll be able to be enlightened. Of course, people like Bhante Ji, and people, many of the teachers these days who teach in the West say that's BS. That's, the enlightenment is there for all of us. We can do it. And I feel that, that this is 100% true. And again, I feel it not because it's some magical, mystical thing, but because really it's working with your mind. This practice is training your mind. This practice is going against habitual tendencies of your mind. And when you look at it that way, there's no magic and mysticism about it. And when you look at it that way, and you can track yourself that you are progressing, that you have experiences, and it's like, 5 years ago, if this happened, I would have acted this way, but now I was calm or equanimous or peaceful or whatever. And so you can track and see your progress. And the more you do that, the more you realize, well, this is going somewhere. I don't quite maybe know where it's going yet, but I can obviously see that I am training myself. I am working, habitual tendencies towards the skillful and the wholesome, as opposed to the unskillful and the unwholesome. And so,
I no longer throw Jehovah's Witnesses off the board.
well, that's good. Listen.
It's true, and people have noticed that.
No, there's no. In quite all honesty, listen. I was raised Catholic. And I was an altar boy, and I went to Catholic school and everything, and that led to a lot of animosity and anger and aversion towards Catholicism. And I had that. Really, what ended that was my Buddhist practice. That's what ended it. When I started practicing metta, when I started really getting into the practice, and I just let it go. Any thoughts that I had, negative thoughts, I just let it go. And now, I was able to, as a lay person, still, my mom is very Catholic, and she likes to go to church, and, she likes to have the family go to church on Christmas and Easter, because that's the only time she can get us all to go to church. She goes to church every week. So, I would still go to church because she was my mom, and I'd sit in there and be like, Catholics, and I have I can't believe that, all these hypocrites and blah, blah, blah. And then now I sit there and it's just very peaceful. It's like, this is a good thing. Everybody's here together doing these things, practicing, trying to be a good person. So it's, so it's funny what you said, but it's also very true. There's nothing wrong with that. I want to have this gentleman.
Yes, when we talk about greed, hatred, and delusion, could you define delusion?
Oh, that's a good question. There's two words, delusion and ignorance, that I've heard from various monastics and teachers can be synonymous, but I've also heard that there's a difference between the two. And I'm not 100% sure that I could really explain much of what the difference in detail. But when we talk about this delusion in Buddhism is not seeing things as they truly are. And so we have this perspective, we have this perception of how things are, and it's a distorted perception. The perception of that things are permanent when they're impermanent. The perception that things will give us happiness when the happiness that they give us is just fleeting, is just something that is not permanent happiness. We have the perception that there is, everybody's most favorite thing, the perception that there is this permanent being, this permanent self, this soul that is me. And that, as the Buddha also said, is another misperception. So that when we talk about that delusion, I'm think that's really where it's going at, is these misperceptions that we have that keep us locked in this cycle of samsara, of being reborn over and over again, of clinging. You know, we want to continue to grasp for sensual pleasures. We want to continue to believe that, you know, we are permanent. We want to continue to believe that, you know, even though everything that we've tried in the past hasn't worked, there might be something out there that we can cling to that will give us happiness. And that very naturally just leads us from day to day, life to life, and on and on. And so when we let go of that delusion, and really the greed and the hatred come from the delusion. Because we have these distorted perceptions, this wrong view, we have this delusion, and from that delusion stems the greed and the hatred. I think that's about as best as I can explain it to you with my limited knowledge. Okay? Yeah.
So in the chants there were some deities mentioned. Which deities is that?
Oh, the deities. Okay. Well, yeah, there's 31 realms of existence in the Buddhist mythology, and there's lots of different levels. Deities. When you see the word deities, almost always what that's referring to are devas. They can also refer. There's different types of deities. There's also yakas and maras and brahmas. No, not brahmas, and nagas. But that's really what it's referring to. It's referring to beings who are either fine material or immaterial, as in you can't see them. You know, they are all around. They exist in this plane. They exist in various other planes, by themselves and that kind of stuff. So that's really what when we talk about the beings, and when we practice metta, when we offer merit, we're offering it to everybody, everywhere. It doesn't matter. So we include every kind of being anywhere. Could be an alien and 100,000 galaxies away. It could be immaterial beings, all beings. When we practice metta, which is here we translate metta as loving friendliness. It's often translated as loving kindness. My preferred translation of it is, although not an exact translation, is limitless goodwill. Because you're developing limitless goodwill, you're including all beings everywhere. Whether they exist, whether they don't exist, who they are, where they are, it doesn't matter. You're including all beings. So that's why when we see that deities, we see that, when we do the Metta Sutta, long, short, fine, gross, any beings, from the smallest beings, to the largest beings, every being, everywhere. We're developing this unlimited, this limitless goodwill, so that we don't want to harm them. We wish them to find happiness, peace, freedom from suffering, freedom from suffering to attain nibbana eventually, and that kind of stuff. So we're including everybody. We're all inclusive. Any being that can possibly exist anywhere. They talk about in science now parallel dimensions and all these kind of things. Any whether it's true, whether it's not, who knows who's living anywhere, it doesn't matter. Bhante Ji talks about there are beings in this direction, we don't know who they are, where they are, there's beings in this direction, we give metta to this direction. There's beings in that direction, we give metta to that direction. Beings anywhere, everywhere, any type of being. So when we see the deities, that's usually why that's included. Okay. Question?
You talked about one of the delusions of self. And, in one of the suttas, the Buddha goes through the 5 aggregates and says how they're not self. And if they were, you would be able to control them or will them to be a certain way. The aggregate of mental volition, of mental formations or volition.
Yeah. It's the same.
Well, when we're meditating, aren't we exerting a certain amount of control, I guess, over that? Isn't that a volition to train ourselves?
Yes. Yeah.
So how does that square with the...
Well, this is getting into into an area that, as a lowly Samanera, I don't know if I can do it too much justice. But really, when we're talking about not self, it's not that the Buddha never said the self doesn't exist, but he also didn't say that the self does exist. He didn't give an answer to either of that. So I think what we're looking at when we think about, at least from my perspective, in my own practice, in my experience as I've come to know it, we're thinking about the five aggregates as a process. These five aggregates are coming together, and everything is stemming from those five aggregates. There's no permanent self in those five aggregates. And this is where it gets very complicated, very detailed. And so it's not to say that Jayantha doesn't exist. You know, that's in the Pali Canon. There's not that we don't exist. It's all an illusion kind of thing. Jayantha is here. Jayantha is a being in a human body, you know, sitting in front of you talking. But he's not a permanent being. There's no permanent self. There's nothing. You can look at any part of Jayantha, body and mind, and you can't find anything permanent. You can't find anything that is everlasting. You can't find anything that you can grasp hold to and cling to as solid, you know, as a like a rock in a storm kind of thing. Because if you try to do that, when it changes, you will suffer. You know, right now when you're young, it's like, oh, I got a nice strong body, I'm good. You know, I can do anything I want, I'm invincible. And then when you get old, it's like you start to get aches and all these kind of things. Like I'm 37 and I just got reading glasses for the first time. And I always prided myself. Like I was a pilot in my teenage years, and I always prided myself on having perfect eyes and all this. And then it's like, oh yeah, I'm getting old now and I have glasses. My eyes are starting to go. You know, it's like when that happened, I was like, oh, that's really cool. It's actually the Buddha's teaching is actually coming alive right in front of me, that this is happening. And you know, I mean, if I clung to the fact that I had perfect eyes, I, as Jayantha, have perfect eyes, and then when I don't have perfect eyes anymore, I suffer because I thought something was solid. I thought something was everlasting, and the rug was pulled out from under me, and it's not. So I think it's, I like to also think of it as a depersonalization. Like when I was talking about, you know, the thought, and when I was able to say to letting go of a greedy thought. When, you know, the Buddha says, many, many places when he's talking about not self, he says, this is not me. This I am not. This is not myself. And so when you look at, you know, all these different aspects of who this person Jayantha is, you can see that even though I claim it to be myself, is it really? When a thought comes into my head, is this me? Do I have to accept it? Just because it comes into my head, do I have to say, okay, I have to follow it? And the Buddha says no. The Buddha says that thought is not me, not mine, not myself. You know, I don't, just because there's a greedy thought in my head, doesn't mean I have to let it stay there. Doesn't mean I have to accept it. I can just let it go as it came. I don't have to say that is me, that thought is me. Because that's self-building. That's building up who I am, what I am. And when you're doing that, you're just setting yourself up for suffering. So when you are able to depersonalize, you know, when you're able to, if anger comes to you, instead of just losing yourself in the emotions and raging out at people, yelling and all this stuff, the practice will, you know, as you practice and progress over time, over years, it comes to the point where it's like, okay, I see that there's a really strong feeling of anger in my mind. But I don't have to let it, I don't have to follow it. I don't have to let it control me and lash out at people, and then I've hurt other people. You know, that's really what I think, where that is going, and I think that's part of the practice in my experience regarding that. Sure. Anything else? Yes, sir.
Returning to your comment about extending kindness to all living creatures and non-harm. So, with respect to karma, is there a distinction between one living creature and another? In other words, if I kill a human being, maybe that's serious bad karma. But if I kill a mosquito, I mean, is that equal? And if mosquitoes cause more deaths and suffering than any other creature, then what's the big deal?
Oh, that's a tough one. You know, I think that there's really not, from what I've seen in the suttas, there's not a lot of this kind of killing is better than that kind of killing, or this person is more worth than this kind of person. Like in the rules for the monastics, you know, the killing of a human being carries a lot more weight than the killing of, you know, of an animal or a bug, but it's still harming. And when we do this practice, we're trying to do our best to not harm any beings at all. Now, that's a very hard thing to do. It's a very idealistic thing. You know, how many, you know, I have in and around my kutis spiders that are about this big. How many of you would like to live with spiders that big? What would you do with them? Would you be able to just be like, okay, oh, nice to see you, have a good, you know, enjoy your time in my kuti? Or would you freak out, or would you run around and try to, you know, maybe you might try to get it out without trying to harm it, or maybe you're just so freaked out about it, you just squash it because you just want it to be gone, so your fear is gone. So it's not an easy process, and it's not, you know, it's an ideal to live up to. So, you know, whether or not the life of one being is worth more or less than the life of another being, the practice is trying to not harm any being as much as we can. So, and whether like literally in karmic laws and everything is one more than the other, I don't know if I can answer that. I don't know if that exists. Maybe in the Abhidhamma, which is a type of, a part of the suttas that comes later, and it's very analytical and going into a lot of different things about different types of karma and stuff. Maybe they talk about it in that, but I don't read the Abhidhamma, so I can't really, you know, go into that. So, thanks. Anything else? Okay then, thank you everybody, and much appreciated for the tougher questions. It made me think, even though if, you know, I hope my answer were somewhat sufficient, if possible. But thanks again, and once again, Sukhi Hotu, may you be happy. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.